M&A consolidation, within India, overseas and all that. So this again comes at different points of time as a cycle, especially in terms of the ambitions of the company, right? So, I mean, there is an increased activity as you can see in India. It will continue. I don't think that's a problem. So also you will see it overseas in terms of Indian companies, especially if they acquire assets, which are strategic to their business. One, on the adjacency side itself, because if they want to expand, if they get assets at a good price, but other things, also investing into, certain areas which probably make sense to them. Especially when we talked about CGT at different points of time, cell and gene therapy. That's not a technology. That's very well developed in India. Maybe some companies will look to acquire it. Maybe some companies like us, we develop it on our own. And so these are again depending on areas which are available, areas which are strategic to companies. I think that will continue. But just on the point of digitalization and what are we excited about, especially at Dr. Reddy's, one of the things is especially in manufacturing. That in the World Economic Forum, you'd have seen that we've been recognized as a digital lighthouse. So that's something we're quite excited about, because there's so many opportunities, all the way from R&D, like Hari just mentioned about, especially in the clinical trials space, there's lots that can be achieved there, but all the way up to manufacturing, huge amount of things that can be done by Indian companies. Which will add tremendous value. I think that's pretty exciting to us.
Okay, let me get in a question or two from the audience, but only if they're questions and not recommendations. Yes, sir, you got your hand up. If you can stand up, we'll try and see if we can get a microphone across to you. Otherwise, we should be able to hear you. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So it's amazing. It's amazing.
Who would like to take that? What's holding us back? Yes, Mahima.
I think the problem is a little beyond that. So I think what guidelines to adopt is a fairly straightforward question to answer, because they're not hugely different. The regulatory reform we need is the fact that it's so fragmented. I mean, you still have multiple agencies involved in the approval of a drug or vaccine, and if it's a recombinant protein, then you have even more agencies involved. If it's like a polio, now you have a third agency involved related to containment and so on. So tactically, we need to solve for that, because this is very unusual in many parts of the world. And even more, to be even more specific, we have guidelines by some of these agencies that don't exist anywhere in the world. And these guidelines are requirements that you're expected to adhere to even before you achieve proof of concept of a product. So you can imagine how cumbersome and time consuming it is. So I think which guideline to adopt is really not the issue. It's the streamlining of this fragmented regulatory process is a bigger issue in my mind.
And I think I heard that from each one of you, that there needs to just be an updation of what is required for the industry to comply with. So the compliance burden continues to be fairly high. I'm going to take one last question here. If there is somebody that yes sir, go ahead.
First of all, this is Naren Chirmule, and I'm one of the speakers here. My question is, all of you presented a very positive attitude of what India is going to be, $300 billion, a lot of education. So my question is, in your eyes, let's say in 2030, do you think we'll have novel drugs by 2030 in India? And I know you spoke a lot about the challenges in that space, but I think I'm just curious. Will that be in 2030? Will that be possible by any? Okay. I'm saying novel drug made in India, approved in the US.
Novel drug in India, approved in the US by 2030. Reality or unlikely? Satish Reddy?
No, certainly the possibility is there, because the companies, Glenn, for example, is quite prolific when it comes to innovation. We also work through our Origin Discovery group. There are several companies working on it. Again, it's a whole lot of effort that is required, whole lot of spend. whole lot of risk that we are taking. To say that, is it easy? It's obviously not easy, but certainly we are chasing the dream.
Glenn?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I believe that this decade, right, we could have our first novel product, right, coming out of India. I think there are many of the, not just us, there are quite a few Indian companies who are working through that process, right? Some companies which have drugs in phase 2, phase 1, phase 2, and some, entering phase 3. So I think I feel a little more positive that this decade you should see a couple of novel products on the global platform, on a global stage.
Well, that gives me the perfect segue to actually get a conclusion from each one of you. And Hari Bharti, I'll start by asking you, if this is going to be truly India's decade, for the pharmaceutical industry, what are the milestones that you believe? We just talked about one, the possibility of a novel drug from India being approved in the US as one of the possibilities. What would you consider as the other milestones that you would watch for?
For me, which I mentioned earlier, is to, if we can do innovation for the Indian patients. For me, that is and finding a way in the regulatory mechanism, fast approvals. We are trying to build capacity, the regulatory capacity for clinical trials. And I think that's a huge opportunity to bring quality advanced drugs at good prices. I think that to me is the most exciting thing.
Most exciting and the aspiration for the decade. Mahima, if this is going to be India's decade, what would be the key milestones that you would like to see?
Frankly, I'd love to see access improve in our own country. And I don't mean for immunization, because that's accessible. But I mean for, routine, absolutely necessary drugs, not the list that we have, but really for a person to live healthy and live long. I'd love to see access for that improve in our country. Should definitely be a milestone.
I think similar to that, but I think overall our spending on health as a country should go up, on both infrastructure as well as pharmaceuticals.
Well, that's been the big ask for a while now, and we're moving slowly edging higher, and the hope is that we will continue to build on that. Glenn, milestones for the decade?
Well, I've already said, I believe that, innovation this decade, hopefully India should see something innovative which can put us on the global map.
Satish?
No, I think across the entire spectrum of the pharmaceutical value chain, I think lots has been said, so I'm not going to add additional to it, but I would say even in services, for example, it's a fantastic opportunity for India to step ahead, exponentially, to be one of the leading service providers, especially for the rest of the people in the value chain. On the biosimilar side, I think we're going to make huge inroads. You'll see more and more companies, especially launch biosimilars, more and more of them. There are already few being launched by some companies, but you'll see more and more of them being launched in this decade. So that we will be probably one of the leading, biosimilar producers. And innovation, it's very clear. We have heard everybody.
KTR, I'll give you the final say. India's decade, what would be the milestones that you would watch for the industry?
Of course, I want this to be India's decade, but more importantly, I want Telangana to lead from the front. I want the industry, the life sciences industry in Telangana to grow from $80 billion currently to $250 billion by 2030. And what I would see also happening is in the short term, because you were also talking about what we are excited about. In the short term, I see a beautiful confluence of technology and biology coming into play and helping the industry really sort of leapfrog. And then in the longer term, in terms of scale, the Hyderabad Pharma City, which will be the world's largest pharma cluster, coming in to help achieve those economies of scale and eventually propel India, hopefully, with novel drugs approved in the US, as somebody was asking, and also coming out with several other innovative products, like Hari was saying, for the Indian market, an Indianized solution, cutting down the regulatory red tape and other things, and hopefully showing us beautifully to the world by 2030 with Telangana again, being the nucleus of it. Thank you.
Well played. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us here for the CEO Conclave. I think for articulating and diagnosing the challenges and the problems that currently exist, but more importantly for laying out a prescription of what the road ahead will look like, for identifying the bets that you are making, where you are disproportionately spending your capital as well as your bandwidth, to ensure that not just each one of your individual companies, but the Indian pharmaceutical industry leads the way as far as this next decade is concerned. Appreciate your time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us here this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, esteemed panelists, for such an insightful session. I would like to invite Mr. Vishal Goyal from RX Propellant to felicitate the panelists and the moderator.